This is Washington Watch, and I am Tony Perkins, and the website, tonyperkins.com. Lots of resources there for you, so I encourage you to check that out. There are links to our guests and to the resources that they mentioned in case you didn't catch the websites that they gave out. All right, we've talked about this, but I'm going to keep talking about it because I think it's very, very instructive. The left has been in meltdown mode since the U.S. Supreme Court handed down the Dobbs decision last month that overturned Roe and Casey. Now this, as we've talked about, what it does simply returns the issue of abortion back to the states where it originally belonged. And hopefully we're going to see the states one by one begin to embrace the sanctity of human life. But the legacy media has been melting along with them. All right. The left, the media, and they're bolstering this narrative that the court is too powerful and too aggressive. Okay, the left now is saying this, the media is saying it. All of a sudden, they've realized, hey, the court's too powerful. The court's unrestrained. You know, I mentioned this at the top of the program. The New York Times ran with a banner headline last week. This is it, quote, "In other advanced democracies, the courts are more restrained," end quote. And then I just want to read just a sentence from the second or third paragraph. It says, "The Supreme Court's power is strange," speaking of ours, the U.S. Supreme Court, the Supreme Court's power is strange in a global context, end quote. And it goes on to say the highest court levels in other rich democracies tend to be less dominant, end quote. Are you kidding me? Where was the media calling for restraint in 1973 when a left-leaning court created a constitutional right to abortion up until birth? By the way, the media does not want you to know that until the court overturned Roe, America was one of just 6 countries out of 195 that allowed abortion up until birth. Now, where was the media calling for restraint in 2015 when a left-leaning court, by a slim majority, 5-4, they had a ruling that threw out 5,000 years of human history and created a right to same-sex marriage? Now, at that time, the U.S. was just the 23rd country out of 195 to create same-sex marriage, and only one of 7 to do so by the court. So why wasn't the media going crazy talking about the unrestrained power of the court? Now, we know the legacy media is biased in their reporting, but why are they so biased? Is there something more sinister and dangerous behind the intentionally deceptive media? With me now to answer that question by taking a historical and analytical look at the media and how they have bolstered leftist regimes in the past is Larry Taunton. He's an author, columnist, and executive director of the Fixed Point Foundation. Larry, welcome back to the program.
Good to see you, Tony.
Well, good to see you as well. Thanks so much for joining us. I think I've teed it up pretty good. So I want to start with your thoughts on the Dobbs decision and how the left has been reacting and what it tells us.
Well, I think you put it very well, Tony, when you said that they have been in absolute meltdown. And of course, you're right in saying that the media has reacted much the same way. And that is because, by and large, the media is made up of leftists. It's even, a leftist standard bearer, someone like Bill Maher has been increasingly pointing out this fact. And so their reaction is fairly predictable in terms of what we've seen since roughly 2016. In that you see threats of violence, you see violence, an actual assassination attempt on Justice Brett Kavanaugh. So this has become part of the standard operating procedure of the left.
Now, I want to. The reason I'd love to talk with you and your perspective on this because, and I didn't mention this in the intro, but I mean, you studied communist. You studied communism. You studied the former Soviet Union. You kind of know how they think. And here's my take on it. I mean, we've always known, and well, I mean, there was a time when I think the media was pretty fair. They kept their own ideological bent kind of suppressed, and they just kind of gave the facts. I mean, I used to be a defender. In fact, I wrote a book, I think back in 2005, defending CNN and the media. I mean, I was a reporter for a couple of years. There was a time when the media was pretty fair. But I think they've been exposed during the Trump years. He kind of flushed them out. And now I think with this court decision, they're completely, they're off the rails. So is there something bigger here that we need to be looking at? How, unfortunately, the memory of many Americans is kind of short. They don't go back to look and see what the media's reaction was in 2015 when 5,000 years of human history was thrown out with marriage redefinition. So this over-the-top reaction by the media attacking a constitutionally tethered court should be a warning sign to us that the media has something up their sleeve.
Well, first of all, let me just bolster your first comments there. I used to do a lot of work for CNN. I would have people say to me, the Communist News Network, I'm sure that they try to control what you say, to edit whatever you publish with them. That simply wasn't the case. Years ago, they brought me on numerous occasions and gave me, free reign to share, my opinions on the Christian faith. Gay marriage was one of the issues that they consulted me on, and there was no attempt to censor or suppress or to control anything that I said. But in the last I think you're right. Beginning with Donald Trump, that has changed in a very big way. The media has become an active participant in the culture war. They've always been left-leaning, the mainstream media, but at least there was some pretense of impartiality. There would be a conservative voice, like my own or many others at places like the CNN, or NPR or the New York Times. That just simply isn't the case anymore. So now they are an active participant in the culture war.
And that's dangerous. I mean, they've become, they've become a cheerleader. For the left, attacking the very institutions that, I don't think the court should be pushing anybody's agenda, quite frankly. I mean, I don't want a conservative court that's advancing a conservative agenda. I want a constitutional court. That's now what we have. We have a court that is tethered to the Constitution. I think the Constitution has staying power. That's why I want our court to be attached to it. But it's just very interesting that when we were concerned about Roe v. Wade in the Casey case, when we were concerned about the redefinition of marriage, and we were saying we need term limits for justices, we need a more restrained court. The media blew us off because they were getting what they wanted out of the court. But now that they're not getting this made up facade of rights that they had gotten for decades, now they want to join the left in attacking the court.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the real hypocrisy here in their attitudes about the courts in general. The left have traditionally seen the courts as a way of doing an end run on democracy. You can't win on gay marriage with a referendum. Use the courts. You don't like a Trump executive order, use the courts to block it. You can't win on so-called gun control, use the courts. So, we were being warned, 3 decades ago by Robert Bork that we were moving towards a judicial oligarchy. Now, the left has expressed no concern over this. Now that the court has overturned Roe v. Wade, and I liked your opening remarks, Tony, because you characterized it exactly right. The court has not outlawed abortion. They have simply kicked it back to the states. In other words, rather than a judicial oligarchy, which is what the left has wanted, the court has done exactly the opposite. They have respected the will of the people of self-determination on an issue like this. So the New York Times dishonestly reported that the court had outlawed abortion. Well, that's just patently false. That is not at all what has happened. And the left has been quite happy to try to create activist courts and a judicial oligarchy. And this court has rejected that.
Right. So we now have a court tethered to the Constitution rather than being blown by the wind made by the New York Times that will just toss us back and forth. But I want to go to, based on your understanding of history and watching the Soviet Union, watching the rise of communism, what is the danger of having a leftist media that is constantly becoming increasingly becoming the propaganda arm of the leftist, those who hold power in this country?
Well, it's an incredible danger because we have traditionally taken the view in this country, and of course, it was the left's argument for a very long time on issues like, let's say, gay marriage or homosexuality, that there needed to be some measure of tolerance regarding these things. And now it's become a case where it's simply forced upon us at every turn with, with perverse things like so-called Pride Month. But the real danger lies with democracy itself, because it isn't merely that we have a left-leaning media. It is that we now have active suppression of dissent. So that, Time Magazine in February of 2021 came out with a piece by Molly Ball in which they were bragging quite openly about the media conspiracy to defeat Donald Trump. And they state quite openly, again, this is Time Magazine, they're stating quite openly that there were efforts to pressure social media companies to censor conservatives, that there was an effort in media for there to be a steady drip of negative reporting on Donald Trump and to give him no credit whatsoever. Now, any American who is listening to us who says, well, I didn't like Trump, I didn't vote for Trump, you're missing the point. If at any point you decide that you disagree with the coveted orthodoxies of the left, you will be suppressed. That is the direction we're going.
So, Larry, again, based upon your study of the rise of communism, the facilitation of their leftist policies and ideology by the media, which was mostly state-owned in some of these countries, but nonetheless, what is the way forward for conservatives? I mean, we still have freedom, and I think we can still use that freedom to preserve this freedom, but I will tell you, I think the hour is late. What do we need to be doing?
Yeah, I agree with that, Tony. I think the hour is very late. Well, I published a piece last week. You can find it on my website at larryalextaunton.com called "Send in the Clowns." And in it, I'm basically making an argument that what we are seeing in this country is the fulfillment of Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 32, which basically says that once you suppress the truth, you will ultimately pervert truth and you'll pervert life itself, which is very certainly the direction that we're going. Unfortunately, many Christian leaders in this country, Tony, and you know this as well as I do, they are unwilling to take a stand on these issues. There's been this whole, so-called winsome debate. Is it appropriate for Christians to take a stand? Is it appropriate for them to get engaged in politics? Well, I would say not only is it appropriate, it's your duty. I mean, do you care about your children? Do you care about your grandchildren? Do you care about your own legacy? I think about someone like my own father who fought in 2 wars against Marxists. I think the very least that I could do to preserve freedom in this country is to write against them. It is to oppose them. And it is to call them out for what they're doing. We have this whole January 6th committee nonsense going on, which is, by the way, very Marxist. It looks very much like an old Soviet show trial, while at the very same time, we have the left using the kind of tactics that they are condemning. In other words, violence, intimidation, and threats of violence and intimidation. This stuff has to be opposed.
Well, I am so grateful, Larry, that you joined us today, and I'm going to encourage people to read that piece. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I'm going to want to continue this conversation because I think history is so instructive for us to see what has happened in the past, how these things have occurred, because oftentimes you don't see it when you're in the middle of it unless you're looking for the warning signs. And I would tell you, I see warning signs all around us.
I do too, Tony, and I'll share with your producer some thoughts on that. I was just recently in Cuba, and I have to tell you, it was very interesting what I was observing there, and the police summoning me in, demanding that I show up for a hearing. So, I mean, this is what happens in these kinds of countries.
Wow. Well, I'm going to summons you too, and you've got to show up here at Washington Watch as well.
Thank you, brother.